The sound of fists slamming against my cabin door jolted the silence at 3 a.m. 3 men in police uniforms were yelling, "Search warrant, open up." Most folks would have panicked, but not me. I actually grinned. I knew exactly what kind of theater this was. Miranda Vane, the president of the HOA, had spent months turning my quiet retirement into a battleground with bogus fines, hostile letters, and now, fake law enforcement. She thought she was putting on a late-night power play. What she didn't realize was I'd been collaborating with a federal investigator in secret for months. This cabin? It was a decoy. The real trap had been carefully set by the very authorities she foolishly believed she could imitate. That moment marked the beginning of the collapse of her HOA kingdom. Where are you tuning in from to watch this Harper Stories episode? Let me know below because the next part is truly unforgettable. As the aggressive pounding echoed through my Eagle Lake cabin, I didn't feel fear. I felt a rush of triumph. After months of plotting, Miranda Vane had finally walked into the trap. The three men outside were dressed convincingly in what seemed like official uniforms, barking out commands they had no legal authority to issue. "Final warning, Morrison, we have a legal search warrant," they shouted, their voices carrying across the calm surface of the lake. Likely half the neighbors were awake by now. Good, more witnesses. "I'm Tyler Morrison. 6 months ago, I thought I'd found my slice of paradisey lakeside cabin perfect for early retirement from my career in software engineering. The vision was simple: sunrises by the lake, quiet afternoons fishing, and maybe the occasional freelance coding gig when the inspiration hit. What I hadn't anticipated was Miranda Vane, a self-declared monarch of the Eagle Lake HOA. She made it her mission to wrap me in red tape from day one. It began as these things usually do, small and petty. Just 3 days after I moved in, I got slapped with a $500 fine for my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall. Apparently, it threatened the visual harmony of the waterfront. Things snowballed fast. She fined me for leaving my bike on the porch, called it an eyesore, grilled me over barbecue Sundays, claimed the smell clashed with community olfactory expectations. She even called real police during a casual weekend fishing trip with friends, accusing us of running a commercial fishing outfit without a permit. The absurdity kept escalating. Miranda handled each citation with the gravity of a war crimes tribunal. Clipboard in hand, she'd show up with a measuring tape and camera, documenting every supposed violation like a forensic expert. But what Miranda didn't know was that her relentless campaign had attracted attention from someone who actually had jurisdiction: FBI Detective Sarah Chen. And by coincidencia or fate, Sarah also happened to be my old college roommate. When I first called Sarah, I just needed to vent and maybe get some advice. What I got instead was a revelation. I wasn't Miranda's only victim. The FBI had received similar reports from residents in 3 other neighborhoods where Miranda's consulting firm operated. Sarah suspected that Miranda wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was offering a paid intimidation service to property management companies, helping them push out problem residents. That phone call 3 months ago set tonight's sting in motion. The voices outside grew louder, their flashlights scanning my windows. Through my phone's surveillance app, I watched as all 12 hidden cameras activated around the cabin. Every inch was under watch, every word recorded, every second streamed live to Sarah's command center. These men were no real cops. I spotted the discrepancies instantly as their badge numbers were formatted incorrectly. Their radio exchanges sounded staged, and their squad car had markings no trained officer would miss as fake. The trap was elegantly simple. 2 weeks earlier, I'd made sure my elderly neighbor, Margaret Clearwater, overheard a fake phone conversation. I complained loudly about my busted security system and mentioned I'd be alone at the cabin that night. Margaret, bless her, was the neighborhood's central newsworthy and Miranda's frequent confidant during their fence line chats. It was bait Miranda couldn't resist, a vulnerable target, alone and unprotected, just right for whatever scare tactics she had in store. What those imposters didn't realize was that my cabin was now ground zero for a federal sting. Every step on my land was trespassing. Every shouted order while posing as police added new federal charges. And every move was being recorded by actual FBI agents positioned around the lake, waiting for Sarah's signal. I shot Sarah a text: "Fish are biting, time to reel them in." Then I inhaled deeply and got ready for the show. Soon, I'd open the door and pretend to be the scared, unsuspecting resident they expected. I'd let them find the fake evidence I'd planted, feed them the lines they needed to incriminate themselves, and give them all the rope required to hang themselves legally. The irony was perfect. Miranda's hunger for power had driven her across legal boundaries she didn't even know existed. Her obsession with eliminating non-conforming neighbors had placed her in the middle of a federal crime scene. In her head, this was a raid to gather proof and finally silence me. In reality, she'd just sent 3 men to commit serious felonies against a federal informant, in a location wired for full surveillance. As I walked toward the front door, I couldn't hold back a satisfied smile. Miranda thought she was orchestrating the drama tonight, but she was just another actor in a production she never saw coming. The real directors were in place, cameras were rolling, and the first act of justice was about to begin. I slowly opened the door, wearing the most convincingly groggy expression I could muster, as if I'd just been woken from a deep sleep. Standing before me were 3 men clad in police uniforms. The one in front, a bulky guy with a crooked badge that read Officer R. Boxtra, stepped forward, radiating the kind of forced bravado that screamed insecurity. "Tyler Morrison, we've got a warrant to search this property for unapproved construction and building code violations," he declared, holding up a piece of paper that looked convincing from a distance. But even at a glance, I spotted multiple red flags. Real search warrants don't use Comic Sans for headers, and they definitely don't misspell the word pursuant. "I'm sorry, officers. This is a bit confusing," I said, rubbing my eyes like someone still half asleep. "Would you mind showing me some ID? Maybe I can call your station and verify the warrant." It was the ideal question, one any real officer would have no problem with, and one that fakes would want to dodge. Baxter's reaction was instant and very telling. His jaw clenched, and he shot a quick glance at the other 2 before puffing up his chest. "Sir, interfering with law enforcement during an active investigation is considered obstruction. Now move aside and let us do our job." I stepped back to let them in and, out of the corner of my eye, noticed Margaret Clearwater tending to her roses next door. At 3:30 a.m., in a bathrobe and fuzzy slippers, no less. Bless her heart, as she was executing her role flawlessly, Margaret had been key to this setup, not just as the conduit of gossip to Miranda, but as our main witness. What the imposters didn't know was that Margaret's early morning gardening was no coincidence. It was part of our design. Her antique hearing aids had been upgraded by the FBI's tech division and now doubled as high-quality audio recorders. The entire sting operation Sarah and I had crafted was a marvel of layered traps. The physical lure was obvious. I'd made sure Miranda, through Margaret, knew I stayed alone at the cabin and had no functioning security system. The digital trap was invisibly 12 hidden cameras covering every inch of the place, streaming live to Sarah's team. But the legal snare was the most elegant of all. Every step they took beyond the threshold was unlawful entry. Every word they uttered while pretending to be law enforcement tracked up more federal charges. And any fake evidence they discovered would only confirm their true intent. Baxter began barking orders like a drill sergeant with a clipboard. "Johnson, sweep the kitchen and living room. Look for any unpermitted additions. Davis, hit the bedroom and bathroom. Make sure everything matches original specs." They split up like kids on a scavenger hunt, rummaging through my cabin, not looking for real violations, but for anything Miranda could twist into a reason to force me out. Our planted evidence strategy was built with Miranda's obsession for documentation in mind. She wouldn't be content just scaring me, she needed proof. Her kind always do. So, I gave them exactly what they wanted. Fake architectural plans for an unauthorized deck addition filled with errors any real inspector would spot. Phony receipts with impossible dates. All of it placed where they'd easily find it, making them feel like sleuths cracking a case. When Baxter uncovered the forged blueprints in a desk drawer, his face lit up. Well, what do we have here?" he said with smug satisfaction. "Plans for a deck that don't show up on any official permits." He held them high like he'd just found gold. "This is a major violation of county code and HOA rules. You're looking at serious finesse, a broken bar, maybe even criminal charges." And then came his big mistake. "You know, we've been keeping tabs on you, Morrison. Out on the lake at 6 every morning. Grocery runs every Wednesday. Poker with your old co-workers on the weekends. No legitimate officer would have that level of personal surveillance info for a code enforcement issue. He just confessed to stalking me and every word was being recorded for federal prosecution. Still in character, I let my voice tremble slightly and said, "Look, officers, if there's been a misunderstanding with the permits, maybe there's a way to fix this. I'm not trying to cause problems." That was his cue. His eyes gleamed like a shark smelling blood. "Well, building violations are a serious matter," Baxter said smoothly, "but sometimes things can be resolved without dragging it through the court's broken bar if the homeowner shows good faith." He leaned in a little. "A cash payment to say $5,000, it could go a long way toward making this all disappear." Just like Sarah predicted, attempted bribery, soliciting a bribe, corruption under the pretense of authority, all of it captured in full HD with crystal clear sound. In my peripheral vision, I saw Margaret still calmly tending her flowers, adjusting her position to record different angles. She was like a one-woman surveillance drone. These imposters had no idea how thoroughly they were being documented. Every camera, every device, every agent Sarah had positioned around the lake was recording this fake search in real time. Meanwhile, I kept playing the role of the shaken homeowner, all while manually ticking off each crime they committed: an unlawful entry, impersonating law enforcement, attempted extortion, bribery, and conspiracy. By the time this night was over, those 3 men would be looking at a mountain of federal charges strong enough to bury them for decades. And the delicious irony? Miranda believed she was orchestrating the perfect intimidation scheme. Instead, she had orchestrated a perfect felony on federal soil against a federal informant, no less. An informant living in a cabin transformed into a high-tech surveillance hub. Miranda had no idea her need for control had led her straight into a perfectly constructed trap. As the bogus search went on, the fake officers strutted through my home with the misplaced confidence of amateurs who thought they were starring in some kind of law enforcement drama. Officer Baxter, still convinced his operation was legitimate, was now orchestrating his co-conspirators, Johnson and Davis, like they were part of an elite investigation team. What he didn't realize was that every item they picked up, every photo they snapped, and every intimidating word they uttered was adding more weight to a live federal case being built against them. Johnson, a jittery, wiry man, came hustling out of the kitchen, clutching a folder I had intentionally left in plain view. "Hey Baxter, look at these receipts for lumber, concrete mix, and electrical gear, all dated last month. None of this is listed in the county permits." His voice was lit with the glee of someone who thought they just cracked open a scandal. But those documents, completely fake. Sarah's team at the FBI had forged them to include deliberate mistakes of vendor codes that didn't exist, impossible purchase dates, and items that didn't line up with the alleged construction. The genius behind our setup was psychological. Miranda's obsession with control meant she wouldn't just send in thugs to threaten me, she'd want proof, something to show off at home meetings, some evidence to justify her witch hunt. So we gave her exactly that: a carefully curated set of forgeries designed to backfire spectacularly. Then Davis called out from the bedroom, found some electrical paperwork and a broken bar, some kind of wiring plan. He walked out, holding another planted file. This time, it was a fake electrical schematic so absurd that any certified electrician would burst out laughing. The wiring defied logic: outlets connected in loops, non-existent voltage ratings. It was engineered nonsense, the kind that made investigators salivate at the thought of fraud charges. While the fake cops got more excited over their discoveries, Baxter made another huge blunder. "Morrison, we've had our eyes on you for months," he said smugly. "We know about your unauthorized builds, how you've tried to dodge the HOA, your habit of ignoring community standards. No legitimate officer would reveal that kind of surveillance hysteria, especially not during a routine building code investigation." What he just confessed to, stalking, harassment, and conspiracy, was all being captured by federal-grade surveillance systems. With each passing minute, the brilliance of our plan became more obvious. These guys thought they were collecting ammo to use against me. In reality, they were generating bulletproof evidence of their own crimes. Every image they took of my staged violations, every threat they voiced, and every lie they recorded was adding years to their future sentences. Baxter whipped out his phone and began snapping photos with precision, like he was building a case. "This is more than enough to get you kicked out of the neighborhood, could even lead to criminal charges for unauthorized construction," he announced, practically glowing with pride. And then came the next part, exactly as Sarah predicted. "But listen, Morrison," Baxter continued, "pushing this through the legal system gets expensive. Court costs, legal fees, it could hit tens of thousands." He paused, waiting for his moment. Then, with a smirk, "If you're willing to show some good faith, a broken bar, maybe a cash payment, I say, 10 grand, I could make this whole thing disappear. No lawyers, no court, just a broken bar handled." It was the second bribery attempt of the night, and Baxter delivered it like a seasoned hustler. That smile of his cold, predatory made it clear he thought I was cornered and ready to pay up. What he didn't realize was that he just served prosecutors a second charge of attempted extortion, tied up in a neat little bow. What made it even sweeter was that we knew where the number came from. Sarah's investigation had already uncovered Miranda's standard resolution fee for these intimidation jobs to $10,000, a cut for her consulting firm and the rest for her hired hands. And now we had Baxter spelling it out loud, word for word. Still deep in my role, I let my voice tremble as I replied, 10,000, that's a lot of money. How can I be sure a broken bar takes care of it? Exactly what Baxter wanted to hear, a frightened homeowner ready to pay. "Trust me, Morrison," he said, dropping his voice. "You hand over the money, and this all disappears. No more court, no more HOA drama. You can go back to enjoying your quiet life on the lake." Outside, Margaret remained dutifully in her garden, fussing over her night-blooming jasmine. She looked perfectly innocent, but her ears were capturing every word through those upgraded hearing aids, recording audio that would reinforce the visual evidence from the cameras I'd installed. The combination was airtight, multiple sources, synced perfectly, and no defense lawyer in the world could argue with it. Inside, Johnson and Davis kept trifling through drawers, investigating with the dedication of men who believed they were immune. Meanwhile, I mentally checked off their ever-growing list of offenses: breaking and entering, impersonating police officers, extortion, bribery, fraud, conspiracy, and stalking. In just 30 minutes, these men had committed enough federal crimes to guarantee they wouldn't be seeing the outside world for a very long time. They had no clue they just turned themselves decades behind bars. These imposters still believed they were calling the shots. So caught up in their bluff and extortion attempts, they completely missed the most crucial clue of all: the unnatural stillness surrounding my cabin. In any genuine operational, whether it's building inspections or a full-blown order, you hear chatter on radios, calls for backup, and the hum of a coordinated team. But these frauds were moving in a vacuum, oblivious to the fact that a fully equipped FBI tactical unit had encircled them, simply waiting for the signal to launch one of the most satisfying takedowns of their careers. Then, at precisely 4:30 a.m., that quiet was shattered. The calm around Eagle Lake exploded with sirens that left no room for doubt. This was the real deal. FBI vehicles surged into the area, their lights cutting sharp lines through the darkness. Brilliant floodlights flared on, transforming the lakeside into a scene out of a blockbuster film. The contrast between the clumsy charade I'd endured and the precision of this federal arrival couldn't have been more glaring. Baxter's swagger disappeared in an instant. Whatever illusion of control he had was obliterated. "What the hell is happening?" he shouted, dropping the forged documents he'd been eagerly collecting seconds before. Johnson and Davis went rigid, panic flooding their expressions as the reality sank in. This wasn't just a scare, they were in the middle of an actual federal raid. From my window, I watched black armored vehicles maneuver into formation with absolute precision, cutting off every path out of the area. Then came Sarah Chen's voice, cutting through the air via megaphonia, calm, firm, unshakable. "FBI, the building is surrounded. Come out with your hands clearly visible and surrender peacefully." Compared to Baxter's laughable show of authority earlier, this was the sound of true command. This was what real law enforcement sounded like. And those three frauds? They were now on the wrong side of it. I couldn't help savoring the irony. The same men who had strutted through my home pretending to be in charge were now visibly shaken, shrinking into themselves like trapped prey. Baxter tried a last-ditch effort to salvage control, barking toward the door. "This is Officer Baxter. We're carrying out a lawful search." But his voice trembled, cracking under pressure, his confidence collapsing under the weight of reality. The FBI didn't bother debating. "You are not recognized as law enforcement. Leave the premises immediately, or face further charges for resisting federal arrest." Panic took over. The imposters bolted for the exit. And that's when I dropped my charade. No more frightened homeowner. It was time for the truth. "Gentlemen," I said calmly, "welcome to a real law enforcement operation." I let that sink in before continuing. "The difference? These officers have valid warrants, government-issued credentials, and the full weight of federal law behind them. You three, you've racked up over 15 federal offenses in less than an hour, all recorded, from multiple angles." The expression on their faces as they processed that was absolutely priceless. Baxter's eyes widened in disbelief. "You set us up," he murmured, stunned. He sounded like a man watching his world implode. "Every single move you made here was calculated and documented," I replied. "Forced entry, impersonating federal officers, extortion, attempted bribery, fraud, conspiracy, harassment, all of it, recorded live with the FBI watching in real time." At that moment, Sarah stepped through the doorway, fully geared and radiating authority. "Rick Boxtra, also known as Richard Boxtra, you're under arrest for impersonating a federal agent, conspiracy to commit extortion, and several additional charges we'll be filing after reviewing tonight's footage." She recited his rights without skipping a beat while her team swiftly secured Johnson and Davis, both of whom had abandoned all pretense of resistance. As the chaos settled, Sarah began explaining the bigger picture. "Mr. Morrison reached out to us 3 months ago about ongoing harassment," she said, now addressing the cuffed men. "Our investigation revealed you're part of a broader, well-organized criminal ring. This wasn't your first fake operation, was it, Baxter?" Her words struck like a hammer. The realization that they'd been under surveillance for months and not just tonight seemed to drain what little fight they had left. And then, the full extent of our setup was revealed. "This cabin," Sarah continued, "hasn't been a simple lakeside retreat for some time now. For the past month, it's been a federal surveillance environment built to document every detail of your activities. Every square inch is covered by recording equipment. Every word you said tonight is preserved." These men had unknowingly walked into a crime scene already wired to record their downfall. What looked like a cozy home had functioned as a forensic lab, baiting and capturing a pattern of organized harassment and criminal coercion. Right on cue, Margaret Clearwater stepped into the scene, strolling over from her flower beds with a contented smile. "Good morning, agents," she greeted cheerfully. "Hope everything came through clearly on the recordings. I've been keeping notes on their little antics for quite a while now." The look of betrayal that crossed Baxter's face when he realized the sweet old neighbor was part of the setup, absolutely unforgettable. As FBI agents loaded the imposters into their vehicles, Sarah turned to me with a look of quiet triumph. "Tyler, your cooperation tonight helped us confirm 8 more victims connected to this network. These arrests are just the beginning. We're about to dismantle an operation that spans multiple states." The magnitude of what we'd accomplished began to settle in. What began as a personal fight against an abusive HOA president had just helped bring down a multi-state ring of fraud, harassment, and organized extortion. What we had uncovered was a well-oiled criminal network that had quietly embedded itself across numerous neighborhoods for years. And while it was undeniably satisfying to see those phony officers hauled off in federal custody, I knew we were only at the beginning of a much larger mission. The true mastermind, the one pulling the strings behind the scenes and responsible for months of calculated torment, was still comfortably asleep in her home a few miles away. Miranda Bain had no idea her intimidation scheme had just spectacularly unraveled, nor did she know that federal agents were already finalizing the paperwork that would end her illusion of control. Phase 2 was now in motion, and the person who believed she had orchestrated the night's events was about to learn that she'd been the real target all along. With the impersonators secured in federal custody, Sarah and I had a narrow window of roughly 2 hours before Miranda awoke and realized her carefully designed operation had completely imploded. We used that time to sift through the evidence and gear up for the next strike. What we had documented wasn't merely a case of fake cops and extortion, it was a blueprint for dismantling a larger criminal structure hiding behind the mask of property management. Sarah laid out files across my kitchen table, each one tied to a different residential development where Miranda's company, Compliance Solutions LLC, had carried out similar schemes. "What happened here at Eagle Lake?" she said, tapping on incident reports from 3 different states. "It's just the surface." Miranda's been orchestrating this kind of harassment for at least 2 years, going after anyone who doesn't fit into her idealized version of neighborhood order. Miranda wasn't just a domineering HOA president, she was a calculated criminal who figured out how to turn coercion into cash. Her business model was disturbingly efficient. HOAs and property managers struggling to oust problematic residents would contract her firm. Then Miranda would unleash a strategic mix of fake legal threats, persistent harassment, and if needed a phony law enforcement operations, just like the one we had recorded. The goal was always the same, to make life unbearable for the target, pushing them to leave voluntarily, usually at a financial loss. As Sarah explained the scale of it all, my phone buzzed with a message from Margaret Clearwater. It read simply, "She's up." Already on the phone. Sounds panicked. Thanks to our surveillance system, we'd been tracking Miranda's communications ever since the arrests. It didn't take long for her anxiety to boil over. She had expected Baxter to call with news that I had either capitulated or packed up and left for good. Instead, she was met with silence. The FBI's behavioral unit had already analyzed Miranda's psychological profile, and what they found was as troubling as it was revealing. 15 years ago, she had been a single mother living in another HOA-run neighborhood. There, she had endured relentless bullying and neighbors and board members criticizing everything from her overgrown lawn to her noisy kids. The hostility escalated until she was forced to sell her home at a loss and move, which upended her children's lives. But instead of gaining compassion from that experience, Miranda seemed to internalize it as a lesson in power dynamics. If she couldn't be the victim again, she would become the oppressor. Classic case of victim turned perpetrator, Sarah noted. She's reenacting her trauma, only this time she's the one in control. Every family she pushes out of their home is, in her mind, some form of twisted justice. What made it even more chilling was how blind she was to the irony. She had become exactly the kind of person who once ruined her life. Yet, in her mind, she wasn't doing harm, she was restoring order. Through the audio feed from Miranda's home, Margaret's voice came through clearly. She had been quietly stationed nearby, documenting Miranda's every move as part of our final surveillance sweep. The chaos was evident in Miranda's voice. She was frantically calling her team, her tone growing more desperate with each unanswered ring. "Rick, pick up your damn phone," she snapped. "You were supposed to report back hours ago." What happened at Morrison's cabin? The recordings captured Miranda unraveling, her voice sharp with worry as she tried and failed to reach Baxter, Johnson, or Davis. All 3 had seemingly vanished. What she didn't realize was that those same men were now sitting in federal holding cells, each being systematically questioned about their involvement in Miranda's operation. Every interview peeled back another layer of her sprawling criminal enterprise. Sarah's phone buzzed with a new update. This one from the FBI's Financial Crimes team. "We've confirmed activity in at least 12 other communities tied to Compliance Solutions LLC," the agent reported. "Our records show over $300,000 in transactions during the last year and a half, all traced to property managers dealing with difficult homeowners." This wasn't just local harassment. Miranda had constructed a full-fledged, multi-state criminal syndicate. She had essentially franchised her tactics at training other HOA leaders on how to execute the same manipulative strategies and taking a cut of the profits from every coerced home sale. The false police raid that targeted me, it was only one piece of her larger arsenal, an arsenal that included bogus legal notices, staged neighbor complaints, fabricated code violations, and coordinated intimidation campaigns, all meticulously designed to break down homeowners until they surrendered. Margaret's surveillance gear had picked up Miranda's most damning call, yet an intense exchange with someone she referred to only as her business partner. He seemed to be in charge of handling the more aggressive components of their scheme. "The Morrison problem has gone completely off script," Miranda said, her voice tight and anxious. "It's time to initiate the backup plan. Get in touch with Tony. Tell him it's time to move forward with the permanent solution. If Tyler isn't gone from Eagle Lake in the next 48 hours, the entire operation could blow up in our faces." The phrase permanent solution sent a chill straight down my spine. Even though I was under the watchful eye of federal protection, Sarah acted quickly, deploying more agents to locate and monitor this Tony to ensure Miranda's threat didn't escalate into something truly dangerous. What Miranda failed to realize was that her entire conversation had been captured and would soon be added to a growing list of federal charges, including conspiracy to inflict bodily harm. Just then, David Goldstein, the attorney who had quietly supported our investigation behind the scenes, arrived at my cabin with news that sealed the case. "I've gone through the HOA paperwork for Eagle Lake," he said, visibly pleased. "Miranda Bain has had zero legal authority for the past 8 months. Her so-called election as HOA president was a sham. None of the bylaw changes she pushed through were legitimate, and nearly all the fines and violation notices she's issued are invalid both under state law and the actual HOA governing documents." It turned out Miranda wasn't just running a criminal operation, she was doing it while pretending to hold power she never legally had. Her fraudulent position, coupled with her hiring of fake police officers, was the final nail in the coffin. Every citation, every fine, every campaign of harassment had been based on forged authority and pure deception. She was no better than the criminals she employed. As dawn lit up Eagle Lake, federal agents were already finalizing arrest warrants for Miranda and several co-conspirators operating in other neighborhoods. The woman who had made life a nightmare for so many was about to meet real justice. Her empire of fear and coercion was crumbling, and for the first time, her many victims were going to see her held accountable. The most satisfying part? Miranda was still blissfully unaware. At exactly 6 a.m., a sleek line of black FBI SUVs crept up the circular driveway of Miranda Bain's immaculate colonial estate. Nestled in the most exclusive part of Eagle Lake, the poetic justice was undeniable. The same woman who had spent years using counterfeit power to harass others was now about to be taken down by real federal agents with unquestionable authority. Sarah had stationed me in the surveillance van so I could watch the arrest unfold in real time, and the view was nothing short of poetic. Through high-definition monitors, I watched as trained agents moved into position around the house with the kind of methodical precision that only comes from years of elite preparation. Miranda opened the door in a silk robe, her expression brimming with outrage, the same disdainful glare she'd used so many times on homeowners who dared to paint their doors the wrong shade. "This is private property," she huffed, "and I do not appreciate being disturbed at this indecent hour." She had no idea how swiftly her illusion of control was about to be shattered. "Miranda Bain, FBI," Sarah said coolly, "we have search warrants for these premises and are placing you under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, extortion, and running a criminal enterprise." Sarah's voice carried a professionalism and authority that instantly made Miranda's bluster feel weak and ridiculous. Unlike the phony documents her hired goons had used to barge into my cabin, this warrant was the real deal, illegal, thorough, and backed by months of airtight investigation. Miranda's face drained of color as the weight of her situation hit her. Inside her home office, agents discovered what could only be described as a criminal strategist's archive. Filing cabinets were jammed with records detailing harassment operations in over a dozen neighborhoods. There were folders on targeted individuals, spreadsheets outlining payment structures, and progress logs tracking which residents had been successfully driven out of their homes. Her computer contained the blueprints of a sinister business: $2,000 for every fake police intervention, $1,500 for surveillance by private investigators, legal intimidation packages priced at $500 apiece. It was all itemized, cold, calculated, and efficient. What made it even more disturbing was how obsessive Miranda had been with her documentation. She kept photographs of each target's property, personal notes evaluating their psychological vulnerabilities, and even congratulatory memos celebrating when homeowners caved and sold for less than market value. One particularly telling file displayed before and after snapshots of neighborhoods where Miranda's services had cleansed unwanted elements. Alongside the photos were calculations showing how much property values had increased along with Miranda's own cut of the profits from those forced sales. As the agents continued cataloging the mountain of evidence, Margaret Clearwater strolled up to the front door, beaming with satisfaction. She had waited years for this exact moment. "Good morning, Miranda," she said with a sugary tone. "I thought you might like to hear a few recordings I've saved." Margaret held out a small digital recorder, one that contained months' worth of audio, all captured from her post next door. The look of disbelief on Miranda's face was unforgettable. She had never imagined the kindly elderly woman next door had been systematically compiling evidence against her. The recordings were devastating. Countless hours of phone calls featured Miranda orchestrating harassment campaigns, instructing her hired criminals on specific tactics, and celebrating the ruin of families and communities. One recording stood out above the rest, Miranda laughing coldly as she recounted how an elderly veteran, frightened by a bogus code enforcement threat over a garden shed, had sold his home in panic. But the biggest shock hadn't surfaced yet. "As I monitored the scene from our van, my phone buzzed with an urgent call from Margaret." Her voice trembled with urgency. "Tyler Brokenbar, you need to hear this now," she said. The original plan had failed and Miranda had already switched to what she ominously called Plan B, and, as Margaret warned me, it was even more terrifying than anything we'd imagined. She played the recorded call through my phone, Miranda's voice cutting through with icy precision. "Plan A's a bust. The Morrison situation is spiraling out of control. If he remains at Eagle Lake, the entire operation risks exposure. Reach out to Tony from the construction crew. Tell him it's time for the final solution. Make it look like a fishing accident. Tyler heads out alone every morning at first light, and that dock's slick when wet. One wrong step, and our problem disappears permanently." I felt the blood drain from my face. I'd narrowly escaped being murdered. I eliminated for uncovering too much. Without missing a beat, Sarah radioed in backup and launched a manhunt for Tony. I sat there, stunned, trying to process the fact that Miranda had chosen to have me killed rather than allow her criminal empire to fall. The same woman who had started with forged citations and fake fines had now evolved into someone orchestrating a murder plot to safeguard her extortion racket. When Sarah played that damning audio during the arrest, Miranda's carefully polished persona finally shattered. "You can't use that. It's fake. That senile old neighbor has been stalking me for months," she spat, desperate and unraveling. But Margaret came ready. "Honey," she said calmly, "I've recorded every call made from your office for the past 6 months. Would you like to hear the one where you plotted to frame the Williams family for insurance fraud? Or maybe the time you talked about poisoning the Hendersons' dog for refusing to take down their kid's swing set?" The scope of Miranda's criminal activities was almost surreal. Investigators found that she had been running her harassment-for-profit business like a fully functioning crime syndicate with a network of corrupt officials, thugs for hire, and crooked property managers. Her laptop held it all: business models for expanding into other states, handbooks for training new compliance specialists, and spreadsheets projecting profits by commodifying human suffering. Detective Chen's expression was grim as she officially read Miranda her expanded list of charges. "Miranda Bain, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, operating a criminal organization, fraud, extortion, impersonating a government officer, broken bar, and about 15 other federal offenses will be adding as the investigation continues." The shift from high and mighty Ho Queen to handcuffed federal inmate was swift and brutal. Her crumbling empire of fear was finally collapsing in real time. Even as she was being taken away, Miranda clung to her delusions. "This is all Tyler Morrison's doing. He ruined our perfect community by refusing to follow the rules." But her cries fell flat, drowned out by a mountain of evidence proving that she had manipulated, defrauded, and tormented hundreds of innocent families across state lines. The self-proclaimed enforcer of neighborhood standards was now facing true accountability from real law enforcement officers. And then came the most jaw-dropping discovery. While searching Miranda's home, FBI agents stumbled upon a secret room at her so-called trophy office. Inside were photos, case files, and personal records of every family she had successfully driven out. Like a twisted collector, she had kept mementos of the lives she'd shattered, the homes she'd forced people to abandon, and the communities she'd corrupted. Ironically, her obsession with documentation is so central to her control it had become the evidence that would bury her in court. A week after her arrest, I returned to my cabin at Eagle Lake and found a place transformed. The choking presence of surveillance and fear that had loomed over the neighborhood for years was finally gone. In its place was something I hadn't felt since I'd first moved here: peace. The morning sun sparkled on the lake, brighter somehow, and for the first time in ages, I sat on the dock with my fishing rod in hand and unbothered, unafraid, and finally free from the constant fear of Miranda's next move. The legal process moved faster than anyone expected, powered by an avalanche of evidence. Rick Baxter and his crew were sentenced to 3 to 5 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to impersonating officers, extortion, and conspiracy. The recordings from our cabin sealed their fate. Their cooperation also helped unravel the full extent of Miranda's criminal network, exposing operations in several other states. As for Miranda, her punishment was far more severe. The murder-for-hire charge, paired with proof of her systematic harassment ring, earned her 7 years in federal prison and over $400,000 in restitution to the families she had harmed. The same woman who once strutted around with counterfeit authority was now wearing a prison-issued jumpsuit, learning what real justice feels like. According to Margareta, who kept in contact with the wives of other ex-board members, Miranda had already begun lodging complaints from behind bars. Apparently, she was upset that her jumpsuit didn't meet the prison sizing standards. 3 days after her arrest, Eagle Lake held a community meeting unlike any before. Gone was the aura of intimidation and fear. In its place was a newfound sense of unity and optimism. The decision to dissolve the HOA as it had existed under Miranda's control, unanimous. 89% of residents voted to replace the mandatory HOA with a voluntary neighborhood watch. It was a decisive rejection of the fear-driven governance we had endured for too long. In a unanimous decision, Margaret Clearwater was chosen to lead our new community group, a role she embraced with the wisdom and resilience of someone who had weathered Miranda's reign and come out stronger. After years of being scared to plant a flower of the wrong color or park facing the wrong way, Margaret's acceptance speech was a breath of fresh air. I think we all now understand the difference between reasonable expectations and authoritarian overreach, she said. This new organization will focus on helping our neighbors, not harassing them. Margaret had received $15,000 in compensation through the Federal Victim Assistance Program for the harassment, intimidation, and murder plot she had survived. But she told us the money wasn't the most important part. What meant more to her was the official written apology from the remaining Eagle Lake board members, acknowledging that Miranda's actions had been unlawful from the beginning. Many of the fines and violations issued under her leadership, they admitted, had no basis in legitimate rules or laws. Detective Sarah Chen had become a local legend. News of the operation had spread quickly, and her name was now spoken with admiration throughout the community. Her professionalism and determination hadn't just saved me from Miranda's scheme as they had cracked open a broader criminal network that had hurt families in multiple states. When Sarah stopped by to check on me and close out the case, we sat on the deck watching the sun dip below the horizon. "Tyler," she said, "what we pulled off here led to 12 more arrests tied to similar harassment networks." She continued, "The Miranda Veen case has become a national blueprint for how federal law enforcement can tackle coordinated abuse by rogue HOA boards. We've heard from residents in 7 other states who are facing the same kinds of tactics. Thanks to this case, we now have a legal framework to pursue these crimes across state lines." The impact of our work stretched far beyond our quiet lakeside community. Property management companies were terminating their contracts with so-called compliance consultants. With the threat of federal charges looming, state lawmakers began drafting legislation to increase oversight of HOAs and protect homeowners from systematic abuse. Our operation had ignited a national conversation about restoring fairness in community governance. But the most meaningful change, at least for me, was what I saw right here at Eagle Lake. Neighbors who once lived in fear of fines, violations, and vendettas were rediscovering the simple joy of living in their own homes. The Williams family, previously targeted over their mailbox style, had painted their house a bright, joyful yellow and planted a lush garden that Miranda would have hated. The Hendersons not only kept their swing set, they added a sandbox and hosted a neighborhood barbecue that ran long past the curfews Miranda used to enforce. When I saw how the community was healing, I knew exactly what to do with my own compensation money. I donated the full $15,000 toward building a lakeside community center, a place for genuine connection instead of forced compliance. It would feature a cozy library, meeting rooms for volunteers, and, most importantly, a memorial wall honoring those driven from their homes by targeted harassment campaigns around the country. That evening, as I sat on the dock preparing to cast my fishing line, I found myself reflecting on everything we had endured and everything we had overcome. Miranda's journey from a victim to an abuser was a grim reminder. Trauma can shape you, but it's the choices you make that determine whether you become compassionate or cruel. Funny thing, I said to Sarah during our final conversation, Miranda used to complain that her old HOA board bullied her, and now, she became the very monster she once feared. The cycle of cruelty only ends when someone chooses to break it. The lake was calm. The only sounds were the soft splash of water against the dock and the laughter of children playing in the Hendersons' yard. No hidden cameras, no secret microphones, no threats of violations. Just peace, the kind of life I had hoped to find when I first moved to Eagle Lake. That dream was finally real, because this time, the community stood together not for revenge, but for something better. I waved back at Margaret, who was tending her roses of the same vibrant colors Miranda would have outlawed for clashing with her aesthetic standards. I smiled, realizing that justice isn't only about punishment. Sometimes, it's about making room for people to grow, thrive, and live without fear. Eagle Lake had finally become the tranquil haven it was always meant to be. We understand how it feels when someone with phony power makes your life miserable. That helpless anger when bullies use made-up rules to destroy your peace. You may have wondered if it's even possible to fight back against those who seem untouchable. Tyler's story proves that with the right planning and allies, any corrupt system can be exposed, and no matter how powerful it appears, you deserve to live free from petty tyrants who hide behind bureaucracy. If this story gave you even a flicker of hope that justice is possible, especially for regular people facing impossible odds, please like and subscribe to Toja Stories. We're here to remind you that every underdog has a chance to win with the right strategy. Thanks for being with us. If life feels like it's tearing you apart one piece at a time, know that we're here with you, turning property nightmares into peaceful homes and neighborhood drama into something you can rise above. Subscribe before they fire us for violating some digital whole landscaping rule.